And you have to be willing and able to share those results pretty broadly too, right? If you're just running all these tests and not organizing the results or sharing them, it's kind of pointless.
What is up, certified homies? Welcome to another episode of From A to B. You have Shiva, and I'm joined by Tara Ice Spice Robertson.
Hi. I don't know how to react to that.
So I was gonna tell you this offline, but I'm like, fuck it, I'll just record this. I could not find a nickname for something that rhymes with Tara that like made any modicum of sense. And I'm like, well, what rhymes with Robertson? Like nothing. And then I'm like, all right, well, you work at Chili Piper. Chili Piper's spicy, kind of adjacent. So Ice Spice is your nickname, Tara Ice Spice Robertson.
I don't mind it, honestly. My last name is tough. It's really long. It's kind of boring. It's not a fun.
You're also a celebrity. So like Ice Spice,
wow.
I think is just appropriate.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're head of Demand Gen at Chili Piper, and you're a fellow podcaster as a host of the Demand Gen chat. So make sure all y'all certified homies go check out that podcast. It's a really, really fun podcast. Not a boring one. Like this one also is not boring because you're listening to it. So the purpose of why I wanted to have you on is you're head of Demand Gen at Chili Piper. And I really wanted to get into your mindset of basically experimentation, CRO, all of these things that Demand Gen. Like, do you care about it? Do you hate us? I had a Sam Dunning, who's an SEO guy. And I first started off by asking him, like, are we mortal enemies? And he's like, yeah. So I don't think us in CRO and Demand Gen are mortal enemies, but I wanted to explore the relationship between between CRO and Demand Gen. So first question for you, Tara. Does it bother you when companies named after food don't sell food?
It's a great one to start. No, it doesn't bother me.
It doesn't bother you that, I don't know, just like companies like Chili Piper don't sell like hot sauce or chilies.
I mean, we give away hot sauce for free to our prospects, so that's one nice perk.
Wait, do you?
Yeah. I'll have to get you some.
Is it Chili Piper hot sauce? Yeah. Officially labeled Chili Piper.
Yeah, it's officially branded.
Okay, great. Okay, so never mind then.
So your question doesn't apply to us,
right? I love this. I hope that next time we meet, I could get a bottle of Chili Piper hot sauce then.
Let's do it. Next time I'm in Austin.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Also, I guess anyone who wants to become a prospect at Chili Pipers will get some free hot sauce too. Mm-hmm. There you go. Okay, so an actual question that's not the bait and switch that I thought it would be. Tell me a little bit about your views about experimentation in CRO, because I think Sam and I had a pretty fun conversation around we hate each other because we're sharing the same resources. Mm-hmm. But ultimately we came to we shouldn't hate each other. We actually really should like each other. So what's your perspective on me as a human being?
On you personally.
But really CROs.
Yeah, I'm really surprised to hear that he started at hating CROs.
Well, I asked him the loaded question, to be fair.
That's fair. I think I've just been really lucky, but I've worked with some really awesome, call them CROs, growth marketer type people.
Sure.
And usually if we set things up right, they're just basically multiplying our results on the Demand Gen side. So if you have a great relationship with them, we're both working towards bringing in more conversions, more pipeline, hopefully more revenue.
Have you worked with bad CROs?
It's a good question. I think, no, I've been really lucky, but I've always worked with really solid people on the ops and CRO side.
If you had to talk about some of the personalities or some of the things that you've done like you say, you've worked with great CROs, right? Like, what are some of the things you say, like, man, that was a great CRO because we did these things together. These are the activities that we were able to accomplish together.
Yeah, I think one thing that might be tricky when you're first working with a CRO is a solid CRO will push back on Demand Gen. We'll come to you with, honestly, probably some silly requests like, hey, we really want to test this thing, but if we can't explain why we want to do that test, please push back. I think those are the solid CROs that I would point to, are the ones that aren't afraid to push back because they're really the expert and they're the one that has to report back on results at the end of the day. So if we come to you with an idea that it just doesn't make sense, maybe we shouldn't prioritize it for whatever reason, pushing back is, to me, a really strong indicator that you know your shit and you know what you're doing and we should trust you with that program.
I guess there can be too much pushback sometimes, right? Like, there's a fine line between pushback to say, let's control and validate and ship things that we know are good, versus like some CROs might be like, I don't like this because I've tested best practices and it's not going to work. And that's where you might maybe have combat between the CRO and the growth marketer.
Yeah.
To push a little bit, it's interesting with your perspective. Like, you're a good growth marketer, right? It's interesting that I think you have the right mindset of what a growth marketer should have, which is like, challenge me. I know I'm not right all the time. But are there perhaps some folks who are not like you, who are instead like growth marketers who are, I'll say there's some designers who are like, I worked at Apple, so I know everything, or I'm the smartest person in the world. I'm sure there's some SEOs who are like, I know everything. Like, that's just a personality trait. There's some growth marketers who are like, I know everything. Leave me alone. Don't test this. This is BS.
I'm glad you said that. I don't think I'm like that. But I just listened to your episode actually with Talia the other day, and I really loved how you put it on, I think you said good practice versus best practice. And if a CRO comes to me and says something like, hey, this is best practice, this is just how we do things, I would be super turned off of working with that person, because like, you don't know our audience, you don't know what we're trying to do here, probably don't have the context that I have. So I think that's where I could see us not getting along between demand gen and CROs. If you're just straight up like, hey, here's the best practices, I'm going to roll out the same playbook that I've done for every other website that I've optimized.
See, it's so interesting because you have the mindset of a CRO while doing the growth marketing, right? You're like, I don't necessarily believe everything I'm doing is the best in the world. Let's validate for sure. But you also have maybe a cursory connection, or maybe like a T-shaped marketer. You have an understanding of a bunch of these folks, like what we do and what we bring to the table. I think you have I don't want to say biased perspective, but I love that that's what you bring to the table. When, I don't know, I've just dealt with some growth marketers, product marketers who are just like, they'll tell me what CRO is. And I'm just like, all right, well, I don't know if I could convince you if you just tell me what you think is right or tell me how to do my job.
That's fair. I think it's maybe not biased, but just my experience has been on smaller teams generally. So I think on a small team, you have to have an understanding of what everyone's role is, or I don't know how you would get things done. It would be kind of a shit show. But
so one thing I've heard a lot of folks talk about is, and this is pretty pervasive as in the upper echelon of the experimentation community, which is like test everything. It's something that fundamentally, like as a concept, I agree with, that we should test everything. And by test everything, as Ben pushes back on, like validate everything. So that doesn't mean literally A/B test everything, but if you have like research, data, you've validated it in some way through some form of data, it should pass through a layer of validation. And if it's site changes that you're shipping that might have a very large impact to the site, to the business, or high risk, validate through maybe a higher form of validation, which is A/B testing. Do you think this is misguided to test everything?
So I've never been in the case where I've had unlimited resources, unlimited time. So for me, I would never say test everything personally. I think it would be fun and it would be great if we could. But I've never been in that situation where it's been like, sure, let's test every element. Like, for example, we're going live with a big product push next week, and we have a bunch of new product pages that are going to be relaunched. We're not testing everything. We're testing, I want to say, 2 major things across the whole site, because we just know we can't manage all these different tests. It's not going to be reliable results. Plus, in B2B, our audience sizes are only so big. So we want to test a lot, but often we'll have pages that just don't get the traffic where it's worth our time.
So on this test everything bandwagon, again, I think it's a idealistic state of, hey, it would be great if we had unlimited resources and the time. I think I agree with you. Practically speaking, you can't test everything. You just can't. Like, many companies just fundamentally don't have the infrastructure, the processes, the resourcing to do it, which I think Romeo said this best, like test as much as you can. I'm sorry. I think he said like test as much as you can. Or I'm sorry. He said test more, not test everything.
That's a good goal. Yeah.
Right?
Just more.
Test more.
I like that.
Every year, test more. Same thing with Stuart. He's like, if you've run thousands of tests, but you ship billions of changes, wild example, but like, that's not great. But if you test 3 things and you ship 10, that's a better percent, right? So percent of things validated through some mechanism is a good way to do this.
I've also run into, and maybe this is again from my own startup experience, but I run into execs confusing experimentation with personalization quite a bit, where they'll come to us on the marketing team and say, hey, we really want to run this test, but what they're really talking about is probably segmentation, personalization versus testing. So they'll say something like, we want all of our users in this area to see this page differently, or we want to invite these people to an event with a pop-up. But that's not really a test. It's not CRO. It's more like we're personalizing the experience on our website for a certain segment.
If you twisted my arm, you could convince me it's testing in some way. I guess it's under the bucket of optimization.
Right. That's fair.
But point heard, like it's part of the whole idea that people don't know what we do. So I just came off a conversation with someone else and we're talking about, am I a person as a CRO who's going to come in and just like give you the things to do on your site and you just do it? No, that's not what we do. We run a validation, we research, we look at data, we analyze, we run A/B tests. We do all these things to try our best to explore new things, uncover data that helps guide the business, but also prevent bad things from being shipped, at least in a staggered way, right? You don't ship it at 100%, you test it out to validate. In your experience, do you think there's that misunderstanding within growth marketers who perhaps only assume what we do is like, we are the last check before a thing gets shipped to just validate rather than proactively explore what can be done to continuously optimize?
I've definitely worked with some CRO folks that have that mindset too, where they're not necessarily the one coming with new ideas to test, or hypotheses to test, but they're just kind of like taking your tests and running with them, which can be great if your team already has a lot of ideas. But personally, I like working with CROs who are bringing those ideas to the table too. And it's not just like, hey, this page is about to go live. What should we test? We should have that conversation much earlier on, ideally.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great tip for CROs, right? Like if you are coming to the growth marketer with maybe a packet of data, right? Or a slide deck that's like, hey, here's some of the research we found. Here's an insight. Here's a problem statement that the users are facing. The copy on this new page sucks. No one understands it. No one understands what the future is here fucking means. And then that's just the meme I use because that's a template that I found on a homepage that just means nothing. So yeah, like the future's here. No one knows what the fuck that means. Then you bring that to your growth marketer and they're like, oh, this is great. Perhaps you don't come to them with saying, we're going to do this, we're going to test this. But that's a collaborative process to say, we've uncovered some insights. And maybe you come to them with like, here's some ideas. But the growth marketer has their own set of priorities, insights, thoughts, data. The CRO has a different bucket. They come together to create a plan towards testing. That's the ideal state, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's ideal. And just internally, one example we've run into recently is we get a ton of feedback from prospects that our pricing page is really confusing. So we've been iterating on it pretty much since I joined around 3 years ago. But our CRO has really run with it. And that's kind of his baby now, is just figuring out like, what's the next test we're going to run? And I don't have to go to him and say like, hey, it's been a while. Can I have an update? He's so proactive. And he's saying like, hey, we noticed this. So now we're going to iterate and try this test. So I think having at least a couple of projects that the CRO can really own on their own goes a long way. I don't think you should have to check in on everything. But it's great to have like one concrete page that is being optimized that we're focused on.
I love that. I think proactivity is a great way to build trust between the CRO and the growth marketer, right? Not waiting for them to come to test. You come to the table and show them the data. You show them this, you show them that. If it's easy as a growth marketer to just look at a packet of data and be like, that's a great idea, fuck it, let's do it. That makes their job so much easier and frictionless rather than like the CROs waiting for test ideas or the CROs waiting for things to do. That's really good insight. I guess so like that's one way of trust building between the growth marketer and the CRO, right? Can you think of maybe some other things that you like, even with your relationship between your CRO? What are some things that you look to say like, yeah, I trust you, I give you full accountability and like run with it? Because I think that's something that a lot of CROs struggle with is like that accountability, that trust to be empowered to come to the table and make those decisions. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation, right? Sometimes trust is earned to be able to run with it. But how can CROs maybe build that trust within that growth marketer?
Yeah, I think one thing, especially if you're newer to the team, is figuring out what metrics the rest of the team cares about. I don't want to like say every CRO is like this, but some CROs are very focused on like, this is the thing I'm testing and this is what I'm going to report on. But if you can go a couple layers deeper, and this is something that our CRO, Vatican, he's amazing, but he does this all the time, is he'll say like, here's the like click-through rate, for example, and it led to this many trial signups, this many demo requests, sometimes even pipeline and revenue he can show. So the further down the funnel you can go with your results, the more, not just trust, but I think your team will just be so excited to work with you even more because you can bring those results and metrics that impact their roles directly.
What excites you about CROs? besides how awesome we are.
Other than how awesome we are. I think, honestly, one thing I really like about CROs, and I think it might be just kind of a personality thing, but the CROs that I've worked with have been very kind of process oriented, and they're really focused on that transparency, which I personally appreciate. And we're a fully remote team. We're all over the world. So it's sometimes tough to know what's going on and who's working on what. So we actually have like just an Airtable. It's pretty not very fancy, but you can see like what tests are running, what the high level results were, dig into what's coming up next. We have a forum to add in your ideas. So just having that transparency, and for me, that makes a huge difference. But I think, yeah, it's really that kind of process oriented kind of mindset. And you have to be willing and able to share those results pretty broadly too, right? If you're just running all these tests and not organizing the results or sharing them, it's kind of pointless to be running a CRO program, because if you're the only one sitting on those. So we try to share the results with not just marketing, but our sales team, if we can share anything that would help them with their outbound cadences, for example, if we did a messaging test.
It's really funny you say Airtable, because I don't think I've met a single CRO who's good who doesn't use Airtable.
That's awesome.
Shout out to Airtable if you guys want to sponsor us. But it's really funny. And I totally agree that transparency is so important to building that trust. To me, it's like a combination of transparency into what that person's doing, and then not community, that's not the right word. It's like involvement. The CRO doesn't come to you with just, hey, here are the tests I'm running. It's, here are ideas and let's work together. So it's not my test, it's our test, right? We've aligned on everything together. If a CRO comes to you saying, I'm just going to run these bullshit test ideas, and there's no transparency into like why they're doing it, then you as a growth marketer rightfully would be like, why? Like, what's the data behind this? And like, you're just doing all this stuff. Dude, it's my page. Like, you as a growth marketer be like, dude, it's my page, bro. Like, you can't just do this random stuff. But instead, if you're coming to it with, here's some data, here's a recommendation. I think these are such important keys to unlocking that collaboration between growth marketers and CRO. You talk about transparency, and I totally agree with that transparency piece. Is it transparency into like what's happening in the testing program? What else? Is it maybe like the accessibility of the data that they're showing within Airtable? Is it like, I'm curious how much of it is tool versus process? Because I love Airtable as a tool, and it makes it so easy to look at like what tests are running, what's the status, as long as that person's inputting everything properly. Is it part on like a tool to enable that accessibility and transparency?
I don't think so. I mean, Airtable's great, but I think it's really on the person to stay on top of things. Honestly, it could be a spreadsheet and I would be happy. I'm not really concerned about what the tool is as long as it's up to date. Especially, like I said, we're a small team, so I'm always multitasking and working on like 5 things at once. So I'm not going to remember what the results were from the pricing page test we ran 2 months ago. So I need to have a really quick reference to go back and look, because I think people could take for granted that if you're not the one running the test, it doesn't stick in your brain quite as well as if you were the one that took a minute to analyze the results, write down kind of that short win. Yeah, just having those readily available. To me, the tool doesn't matter.
So I know you talked a little bit about process as well. So having ready accessibility to the tool, so you, Tara, can just go proactively look at the results and see, oh, it's, here's the test results. I can look at past test results. That's great. It should be done, not just for growth marketers, but in general. I think like leadership should have easy accessibility to like, here's your trophy case of test winners, and here's the bucket of insights of shit that we've learned the past year. Like that should be done and then some. But you talk about process too. I think in our, you guys are remote, we're remote. All of us get a meeting fatigue. All of us get just like over comms and like, are we meeting to just have a meeting? Are we meeting to prep for the meeting and then having a debrief of the meeting after the meeting? Like it's so much comms that I think in some cases there can be over communication. Like, bro, I get it that you're running all these tests. Just distill it down. So I guess there can be an over communication, but then there's probably a problem on the other side of under communication where like the dude's ghost and you're like, can you give us an update? And dude's like, just go to Airtable. Yeah. Like that's not helpful. So and maybe this is just a personal preference thing, but like what makes sense from a cadence standpoint on like reporting on results and having regular check-ins with growth marketing?
Yeah, I think this could vary. If you have a ton of traffic and you're in B2C, maybe you're doing way more tests and your velocity is different than ours. But we meet up pretty much every 2 weeks, so bi-weekly. And that seems to work well for us. It's a quick meeting. It's half an hour. And I know you mentioned putting together like slide decks earlier. We don't do any of that at Chili Piper, which I'm so grateful for. Internally, we don't at all. So we literally just have a running note stock for this meeting with here's what we want to talk about, here's next steps, and then we'll have the Airtable open if we need it.
How do you put pictures though?
You can paste those in a Word doc or in a doc.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean, if you wanted to do fancy slides, you could. But I think forcing people to do that for an internal meeting, that's where you get into the, okay, now I have to block half an hour before the meeting to make my slides for the meeting. So I don't love using time that way personally. So like I said, we meet up biweekly. And then obviously we have a million Slack channels here, but we have one around what the CRO experiments are. And if we need to collaborate kind of async, we can do that.
All right. So I think my takeaways from all this for right now is the CROs have to do a really good job of building trust and building that bridge within, I'd say, marketing as a function, unless it's embedded. Even if it's embedded, they still have to build the relationships with marketing leaders, demand gen leaders. Building that relationship includes be trustworthy, be proactive, show transparency. These are, I guess, activities that build into somewhat of a process, but I think it's also just a mindset of, I guess it's both. It's process and mindset, right? It's process of building something that's transparent, but also you as a person being transparent that like sometimes tests might not win. And that's not the fault of the CRO. That's not the fault of the growth marketer, but shit loses. That it happens. So I think those are like top 3 themes for me of building and growing this relationship within the growth marketing team. What else can CROs think about maybe to just ensure that they're put into positions to succeed within growth marketing, and growth marketers don't look at them as like, dude, I hate these. Like another Slack message from Shiva, like, dude, leave me alone. I don't have time for your shit.
Yeah, I would say some of it honestly starts at the top, so it'll be a little bit out of your hands. But maybe if you're looking for a new job, if you're interviewing, you could kind of suss this out. But I think having that culture of growth and learning and wanting to experiment really starts at the top. And if you're joining a company that isn't that excited about experimenting and learning, then like you said, when you have a test that fails and you have to deliver that news, it's not going to be fun for you. It's not going to be like, hey, we have a great learning opportunity here. It's going to be, hey, why are my numbers down? Or like, why did it lose? Or whose fault is this? Right? Like a test isn't anyone's fault. Like we wanted to test something to learn. And so I think that's something you can kind of look for before you join, hopefully, a company. I don't think it's something that a CRO could change themselves if it's starting from the top. And then another thing too is if you're joining a company, you can ask for help on things like especially from your demand gen or your marketing ops people of, hey, I want to run this test, but I want to estimate like what will the return be? Or like, how can I figure out the ROI from this? Don't feel like you have to figure that out, especially if you're not on the marketing team, if you're on a different team. Don't feel like you have to figure that out like as an island. I think people want to learn and they want to show the ROI of their work and your work and hopefully everyone's. So ask for help on setting up those metrics too.
I really love that. Yeah, like it is a team sport at the end of the day, right? And a lot of times, to be clear, I think to put you in the mindset of a CRO, so many times it's CROs like fighting for resources, fighting for leadership buy-in, like just constantly, we're just fighting everything all the time, always. I think sometimes a lot of CROs have to have a mindset of like toughness and like confidence. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if you're seen as weak, for example, or not confident in what you're doing, then people might not be as bought into what you're doing and the vision of your program and the process and all that stuff. It can be sometimes perceived as you are not confident if you're asking for help. I think that's just a cultural thing, right? Like,
yeah, maybe
some people for some reason decide like, oh, if you go to therapy, you're a weak person. Like that's the dumbest logic I've ever heard. It's of course not correct. Sometimes people can be seen as, oh, you don't know what you're doing or you need help to build this thing. No, dude, like demand gen wants you to help them, right? So if you're asking for help to help you help them, that's fine.
If CRO is doing its job when you're learning things, experimenting, whether they're wins or losers or whatever you want to call them, it should make every program better. It's not just like CRO wins and everyone else loses, but all of your website traffic should be benefiting from it regardless of the source. So everyone should be helping CRO if they can.
Totally. All right. The last thing I wanted to ask you before we jump into shit you need to know is you had a story around test everything. And I was curious to hear the story. I wanted to work it in organically, but my ADHD brain, I wanted to talk to you about other things. That's just what happens in this episode. I'd love to hear that story.
I had this one exec who came to me and said, hey, we really should test putting the local weather in our marketing emails. And we're B2B, like we don't sell like umbrellas or anything, but he just thought it would be cool because he saw it somewhere. I don't remember where it was. And I remember it was one of the first times that I really pushed back and just kept saying, why? And he said, yeah, it would just like show the personalization. He just kind of said a bunch of buzzwords that were hot at the time. And I think it really was one of those things where just because a tool can do something doesn't mean you should. So whatever email tool we were using at the time, I want to say it was Marketo, but they had unveiled some like new personalization widget thing at the time, and he was really excited about it. But yeah, we're selling software. I don't see what the weather has to do with anything. Like, is that going to help anyone do their job better or learn about us? It just seemed like such a distraction to me.
There's one niche case where like the salesperson knew the weather for the lead that they were about to call. And in the intro, they're like, hey, so I see that it's raining in California right now. Damn, that must suck. Anyway, let's talk about B2B sales. Like,
I could see that for personalization for sure. Like, say there was a tornado somewhere, maybe you don't want to call that person that day, or maybe you want to check in on them. But yeah, when you're setting up a nurture email for marketing, I don't see if the weather is worthwhile.
I'm going to strongman this person's argument with made up data.
Sure.
So let's say, for example, instead of a leader, it was a CRO who was trying to talk to you, Tara, about, hey, we should test having a widget that shows the weather on our site. So if I had to strong arm it with this made up data that I have, I might come to you and say, so Tara, we have this new widget that is very easy to turn on and it will show the weather. We found through some research that, fuck, I'm on the spot. I can't even make up a story to justify this. So let's just say, for example, we found through some research that when it rains, I don't know. I can't even strong arm this.
So I can think of a B2C example.
Well, but that's what I'm trying to think. B2B.
I remember reading that pizza delivery has a huge spike when it rains, which totally makes sense. Like, you don't want to leave the house, you're going to order pizza. But in that case, it doesn't really help to tell me that it's raining. Just send an email to people that you know it's raining in their city. It doesn't really help to just show me, hey, it's raining in Toronto.
So in that case, let's say, for example, in this scenario that none of us can justify because it's just a wild example that should never be done. In that case, if that CRO was coming to you, if they came to you with some amount of data, right? If they came to you saying, here's a widget, you might be like, that's fucking stupid. But then if they came with some amount of concrete data to prove that concept, you might think the idea is stupid, but you'd be far less, or I guess far more interested in running that test if it was presented in a packet of data associated with maybe the problem statement or the solution, right?
I definitely would. And I think the difference there too is, in that case, I'm assuming the CRO would help me implement this test instead of just throwing an idea at me and walking away, which is kind of what happens sometimes from leadership. So if the CRO is super excited about it, has data for some reason about this, and they're going to help implement the test, then I would have a hard time saying no, honestly.
For all you listeners, I would love to hear an actual legitimate justification through some amount of data for putting the weather on a B2B website.
Please tell me. Yeah, I'd love to know too.
I would love to hear that as well. Cool. All right, Tara, what is it now time for?
I just took a big sip of coffee. It is time for shit you should know.
Well, let's go.
Let's do it.
So this week's shit you need to know is brought to us by Emily Kramer. This post stood out to me, and I think you as a demand gen person, it'll also totally stand out to you. I don't know if you've seen my post for like Happy Friday to everyone except. This was kind of a similar vein of a friendly Friday reminder. I'm quoting her now. A friendly Friday reminder to delete those random acts of marketing, RAM, right off your list. And she gives 3 examples. Focus on work with the potential to drive impact. Say no or not right now to requests that don't ladder up to your goals, and don't just copy the tactics of other companies. I thought this was extremely appropriate because a couple things. One, I'm sure this totally resonates with you as a demand gen person, right?
Yeah, I'm nodding. I was trying to guess what post it was because I follow all of her stuff. She's awesome. And that was a good one. Yeah.
I never see my sphere is pretty like CRO focused, but someone else in my connections liked it, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh man, that is That is excellent.
Yeah.
So you as a demand gen person, you're like, yes, there are wild amounts of random acts of marketing, which is stupid.
Yeah. And I think, again, I'm on a small team, so it's hard to prioritize. Things come up that you can't always control. But I think demand gen can be similar to CRO, where a lot of people don't really know what the role is. So you kind of end up with a lot of random stuff on your plate, especially like in demand gen. I'm like the HubSpot person, I know how to use all of our tools. So anytime something comes up that touches our MarTech stack, it's like, oh, she'll do it. Or like, oh, she can figure it out.
Yeah. Tara's the Swiss Army knife of the website.
Yeah. And I think that happens to CROs too, right? Because they're like, oh, you're technical. You know how to get stuff done and move fast.
Yeah. So the reason why this stood out to me is not just because obviously you as a demand gen person, you're like, yep, I hate random acts of marketing. It brings it back to that example of the weather widget. I wanted to call out random acts of testing. Right? Rats. What are some random acts of testing that you're like, I saw this widget, let's test it? When we discuss things about why are we testing this? Like we have a limited resourcing, limited budget. Why has this like test this weather widget thing even come up on our list? I'm okay with bad ideas in a roadmap, but they're just going to be at the bottom of the list.
Right.
So I say bad ideas because there's no data backing that. It's, to me, that's a random act of testing that you're just like, let's just try it and see what happens. That's a fine mentality, but practically, if you don't have the resources, you do have to prioritize.
Yeah, I think one thing that happens a lot, I mean, I'm biased to B2B, but I see a lot of, hey, this website, like everyone knows Gong, for example, does great marketing. So our website should also look like this, or like everyone loves what Mutiny's doing right now. So let's go copy them. And I think that's where best practices can really just get messy, because the last thing you want to do is just be safe when you're trying to win people over. I think it's just, it can be safe, but you're not going to hit your numbers. So then it ends up being not safe. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation where if you follow just the safe zone for everything and you're just copying other people's websites that have already been proven out. I mean, first of all, it might not work for your audience anyway, but assuming that they're going after the same audience as you, then it might work. But people are going to be like, what does this company do again? And it's just back to what you said about that. I can't remember what the headline is that you really like, but
the future is here.
The future is here. So who's going to know, like, what does that mean? What company was that again? Whose website I saw? And if you're not memorable, then you're not doing great marketing. So you just blend into the background.
So I love this because, and I'll end on this super large compliment to the Chili Piper team. Man, your marketing stands out so much. You, Tara, as an individual, your marketing stands out in a sea of what getting married taught me about fucking B2B sales, right? Like, it truly stands out. The person, and I talked about Chili Piper in an episode I did a couple of the episodes ago with Finn McKinty, is like, the marketing is just so good. It's so memorable. Anytime I see a Chili Piper post, I'm like excited to read what you guys are talking about, the engagement you guys have, like your meme that went stupid viral about like the April Fool's joke about going back into the office. I literally remember that word for word. The image is in my brain. And shout outs to Chili Piper for the marketing that you guys do. I'm sure you're spearheading a lot of that, but you're right. It's instead of doing these random acts of marketing and you're just going through shit to just do it, have purpose. And when it comes to testing, have purpose in the testing. Don't just run a fucking weather widget. I'm going to use this now as a meme, by the way. We should just test the weather widget. Like, don't just randomly test shit because you saw it or it's super easy to do, unless there's another benefit, like scaling the program. Like, there might be other benefits, but for the most part, don't do random acts of marketing because someone told you to. Don't go to meetings because you just have to do it. Like, be aware of people's time and resourcing all across the board within experimentation and all others. And yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap. Any other parting thoughts, Tara?
Yeah, I do have to just quickly say, since you brought up the April Fool's post, I know I kind of gave leadership a hard time earlier, but that was actually an idea from our co-founder, Nicholas. And when he first brought it up on Slack, I was like, it's not that funny. No one's going to get it. And then it really took off. So I was completely wrong. But I think it just shows that you have to really understand your audience. And sometimes we can be wrong, and that's fine. And I was totally wrong on this one. But we knew, like, April Fool's, it's one of those things that it sounds like it could be a random act of marketing, but we know that people on LinkedIn follow us for that type of content, and we kind of have to crush it at that kind of holiday. So we just knew we had to go for it.
Yeah. And you guys absolutely did. It was fire. Cool. So Tara, where can the lovely folks find you?
Yeah. So follow me on LinkedIn. I still cringe a bit every time I post for my public profiles. I'm not used to putting my face out there. I'm trying to get used to it. But yeah, give me a follow to encourage me a little bit.
So follow you on LinkedIn and make sure y'all are subscribed to the Homie podcast, Demand Gen Chat. Very, very fun podcast with a lot of dope people. So go check her out. And Sarah, thank you so much for joining this episode. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Shiva. This was fun.